Chapter 1989 Sword Geek. Losers are always in the wrong. Sir God Dao trembled and he couldn't help but lower his head. He lifted his head at the next moment, but then he shouted hysterically, "Jian Wushuang, you are great, but don't get too carried away. I am going to die at your hand. But in no time, you will absolutely die at another person's hand. It is only a matter of time. You will have to die." Sir God Dao was frenzied. Jian Wushuang saw and shook his head. There was sympathy in his eyes. "Don't worry, I won't torture you. Go in peace," Jian Wushuang said, and then pointed casually. There was a ray of light that pierced Sir God Dao's head straight away. Sir God Dao died on the spot. Jian Wushuang's face turned cold at the sight. "Maybe you are right. It is only a matter of time until I die by someone else's hand. However, as long as the day has yet to come, I will try my best to improve my power. I will try my best to protect everything around me," Jian Wushuang muttered, and there was determination in his eyes. Just then, vroom, there was a loud whistle from the sword. Jian Wushuang immediately looked at Blood Mountain's sword on his back, and he realized that Blood Mountain's sword was quivering vigorously. Jian Wushuang was connected to Blood Mountain's sword at heart. At that very moment, he could feel how excited Blood Mountain's sword was. It was definitely because something impressive had appeared. What happened? Jian Wushuang creased his eyebrows. "Ever since I received Blood Mountain's sword from my master, this is the first time Blood Mountain's sword is acting this excited. It isn't even a fierce fight, but it got excited without showing any sign. If I'm not mistaken, it should have sensed the existence of something." Jian Wushuang thought for a while, then he took out a token to ask. Very soon, he found out the reason behind it. Earlier, when he killed Sir God Dao, there had been an ancient cave dwelling that had come into the world in the nearby ancient battlefield. In the ancient battlefield, there was a variety of opportunities. There were naturally many cave dwellings that had been left behind by experts from ancient times. In the 3,000 years that Jian Wushuang had cultivated in seclusion, more than a dozen of cave dwellings were discovered in the ancient battlefield. Every time an ancient cave dwelling came into the world, it would stir up a fight among the experts. However, the opportunities in the cave dwellings, some were taken away, but most of them remained in the ancient cave dwellings. It wasn't because the experts from Eternal Chaotic World didn't want the opportunities, but because they couldn't get them. The ancient cave dwellings contained a test. The tests were mostly very strict and no one could pass them. Hence, the opportunities that came along with the tests were naturally untouched. In the ancient cave dwellings that had just come into the world, there were a few experts that had actually gone in by accident previously and obtained some opportunities. However, as the opportunities were taken, the cave dwelling finally came into the world and it stirred up a shocking commotion. Especially towards sword principle cultivators. When the ancient cave dwelling came into the world, not only Jian Wushuang, but also all sword experts who were wandering on the ancient battlefield, their divine weapons sensed it and naturally notified their masters. Juju Sword Mansion. The ancient cave dwelling is named as Juju Sword Mansion. Jian Wushuang went through the information that he had just obtained from Sanctuary Alliance. The first batch of experts who found the ancient cave dwelling naturally had a basic understanding of the ancient cave dwelling. They knew the origins of the cave dwelling and they also knew the opportunities within. Juju Sword Mansion contained boundless variations of sword principles. The sword principles were stored on 9 sword steles in a peculiar way. The 9 sword steles contained Juju Sword Mansion's biggest opportunity. However, the 9 sword steles were scattered in 9 corners of Juju Sword Mansion. It wouldn't be that easy to get them. In the beginning, the experts who discovered Juju Sword Mansion had found a sword stele by accident. Hence, it had led to the birth of Juju Sword Mansion. It is obvious that Juju Sword Mansion is aimed at sword cultivators. The 9 sword steles contained a large amount of sword principles. These sword principles are all from ancient times. Jian Wushuang licked his lips and he was obviously tempted. His power had reached such a level. Although he could rely on himself to create a sword unique skill that was powerful, it was limited. Compared to the shocking sword principle from ancient times, his unique skills were inferior. Hence, if he were to master a few sword principles from ancient times, It would absolutely raise the power of a sword cultivator. Just like the number sword cultivator in the First Era, Sword Emperor Dugu. Although he was gifted with sword principle and he had created a sword principle that was suitable for him, his biggest trump card was still King Sword Principle. It was his true power that swept all obstacles away and enabled him to march over the First Era unhindered. King Sword Principle originated from ancient times. Although Jian Wushuang had already mastered the sword principle, it wasn't easy to perform it. On top of that, he had only mastered the first move. So, he could only use it as his trump card. The sword principle from Sword Mansion Juju was different. The 9 sword steles combined large amounts of sword principle from ancient times. Every sword stele contained a large amount of ancient sword principle. To Jian Wushuang, it was extremely attractive. Jian Wushuang called. Master, Jian Yi's figure appeared next to Jian Wushuang. Have you heard of a sword expert named Juju from ancient times? Jian Wushuang asked. Juju? Sword geek Juju? Jian Yi looked surprised. It seems like you heard of him. Tell me about him. Jian Wushuang was interested. Master, I have heard of Juju. Among solo experts in ancient times, he was considered as a top-grade sword expert. Unless it was necessary, the top forces in ancient times wouldn't offend such an expert casually. Besides, Juju was known as Sword Geek. He truly was geeking out over sword. He was passionate about gathering sword principles and he wasn't interested in ordinary sword principles, only in sword principles that were exquisite and brilliant. For that, he often challenged the sword experts in ancient times. When he challenged them, he liked to bet with rare sword principle books. If his opponents lost, they had to hand him their strongest sword principles. Over the years, he collected many powerful sword principles. That is also the story of how got his name, Sword Geek. In ancient times, he might have been the one who was proficient in the most sword principles. Many sword experts who were more powerful than him didn't know as many sword principles as he did. The Sword King. Chapter 1990 Juju Sword Mansion. Passionate about gathering exquisite sword principles, and he constantly challenged many sword experts to bet with sword principles. He was truly a sword geek, Jian Wushuang smiled. However, regardless of if it was sword principle, saber skill or other secret skills, it would be about quality over quantity. Even though he mastered countless sword principles, there were definitely many sword experts who were more powerful than he was. That's true. This sword geek, Juju, was considered a top-grade expert in ancient times. But there was a distance between him and the peak in ancient times. Jian Yi smiled. However, if he were to be put in this era, Juju would definitely be a high and mighty existence. There were many great emperors in this era that would only be a nuisance in front of him. Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows, but he could understand why. Anyone from ancient times was, of course, not someone anyone in the Second Era could compare to. The sword geek, Juju, was definitely a top-grade expert in ancient times. If he were to be in the current era, he could march over unhindered. Regardless, Juju definitely possessed a bunch of sword principles. To me, they would definitely be useful. It seems that I have to fight for the 9 sword steles too. Jian Wushuang smiled faintly. Jian Wushuang made up his mind and immediately instructed, Jian Yi, you stay back to look after Greenfire World. I will make a trip to Juju Sword Mansion. Master, you don't need me to go with you? Jian Yi asked. There's no need to, Jian Wushuang waved. Ever since he had broken through to the 7th step and possessed the perfect chaotic divine body, he had been different from before. He might have yet to catch up with Jian Yi in terms of power, but in terms of defensive power, even 10 Jian Yis wouldn't be his match. He would be able to deal with everything if he headed over to Juju Sword Mansion alone. If he really couldn't survive when he ran into danger, the outcome would be the same even if Jian Yi helped. Jian Wushuang didn't delay any further but departed. Juju Sword Mansion isn't too far away from Greenfire World. If I rush my journey at my top speed, I will be able to reach it in a few days. I should be able to make it in time. Jian Wushuang was looking forward to it as well. In the ancient battlefield, not only him, but also many sword experts, who had sensed the birth of Juju Sword Mansion, received the news and rushed over simultaneously. There were even experts who didn't have expertise in sword principles that rushed to Juju Sword Mansion. The 9 sword steelies might be useless to cultivators who weren't good at sword principle. However, if they could obtain it and sell it, it absolutely could be exchanged for abundant resources. Hence, there were countless experts that swarmed over it like bees. In a barren land with no vigor in sight. Then, there was a tall pavilion towering in the barren land above. The pavilion door was wide open and it was mysterious. Swoosh, swoosh. There were 2 figures standing side by side outside the pavilion. The 2 Sir Gods appeared and glanced at the pavilion before they entered it. There are another 2 who want it. Including the 2 of them, there are more than 100 experts in Juju Sword Mansion. There are 105 of them. I reckon there are still people who are rushing here. There were 2 purple-robed figures hiding in the void outside the pavilion. They were paying close attention to the pavilion. The 2 of them were assigned to watch the pavilion by Sanctuary Alliance. Not only outside the pavilion, but there were also experts that were assigned to watch from within as well. Sanctuary Alliance would pay close attention to whichever cave dwelling came into the world or any opportunity on the ancient battlefield once it was announced to the public. For instance, Sanctuary Alliance was very concerned about Juju Sword Mansion then. Just then, swoosh. There was a flash of flowing light that burst out of the nearby void. It didn't stop but leaped into the pavilion without any pause. The 2 purple-robed figures stared at the pavilion with their eyes wide open. This speed is so fast. This is too fast. Even an ordinary Emperor God wouldn't be able to achieve such speed. He at least should be a peak Emperor God to travel at such a speed. However, the person who just entered, I didn't see his face but his aura was only of a Sir God. That's weird. Although he was confused, he didn't think much. It looked like it was only a pavilion but it was a mystery inside the pavilion. It was a huge, barren world. The world was so huge that no one could see its border. This is Juju Sword Mansion? Jian Wushuang smiled while he looked around. The biggest opportunity in Juju Sword Mansion is definitely the 9 sword steelies. Of course, there are only 8 left. The 8 steelies are scattered to 8 different corners. I have to take time to find them, Jian Wushuang muttered and plunged to another direction in the void. He wasn't sure of the structure and environment in Juju Sword Mansion so he could only wander around. But it was not long after he entered Juju Sword Mansion. Hong! There was a vigorous roar that sounded from the void afar. At the same time, there were ripples of divine power. The loud roar and the ripples of divine power, Jian Wushuang naturally didn't find it foreign. I just entered Juju Sword Mansion for a while. I shouldn't reach the 8 sword steelies so soon, right? But the ripples of divine power are obviously from a pitch battle. Jian Wushuang was surprised. He didn't hesitate but plunged in the direction of the source of the divine power ripples. At the end of the direction in which Jian Wushuang plunged, swoosh, swoosh, there were 2 figures, a male and a female, traveling forward at a high speed. The 2 of them looked terrified and judging from their traveling speed, they were running for their lives. Behind the 2 of them, there was a figure that carried an aura that had reached the level of Emperor God who caught up with them. Mo Yu, I'm sorry that I dragged you down with me, a middle-aged man said as he wielded his sword and carried 2 on his back. It meant that he had carried 3 on his back originally. Now, he was soaring with rage and there was fire burning in his eyes. You and I are best friends and we are wandering together. We naturally have to go through trials and tribulations together. Why did you apologize? It's just that we never expected that the golden-headed lion would be so persistent. Sir God Mo Yu in a simple grey robe clenched his teeth and spat angrily. Blame me. I shouldn't have offended the golden-head lion back then. He is a madman. A madman. The middle-aged man carrying 3 swords said. Forget about that for now. We have to figure out a way to shake off the madman. Otherwise. Sir God Mo Yu was distressed. Although both of them were powerful Sir Gods, the one who was after them was an Emperor God, a mad Emperor God. Chapter 1991 Sword Emperor's Arrival. Just as the 2 of them were thinking of how to escape, swoosh, There was a figure that suddenly plunged over from afar and appeared in front of them in an instant. Such speed. The middle-aged man who carried 3 swords and Sir Godmoyu were shocked. Then, they subconsciously stopped. They looked at the incomer immediately. Tian Jian, it has been a while, Jian Wushuang smiled. Jian Wushuang? The middle-aged man who carried 3 swords on his back, who was the master of Sky Sword Mountain, stared. Sword Emperor? Sir Godmoyu was shocked too. Just as they recognized Jian Wushuang, they noticed the aura that was given out from Jian Wushuang's body. Sir God aura? Almighty. The two of them were surprised. One should know that Jian Wushuang could suppress a peak emperor god at real god level. Then, as he broke through his power, the master of Sky Sword Mountain and Sir Godmoyu took a deep breath and immediately became polite. Tian Jian, you look like you are being chased. Jian Wushuang asked. He had dealt with the master of Sky Sword Mountain before. Back when he was still a universe god, he had stayed in Sky Sword Prison under the master of Sky Sword Mountain for a few thousand years. It was the master of Sky Sword Mountain himself that had imprisoned Jian Wushuang. However, Jian Wushuang also knew that the master of Sky Sword Mountain had suppressed him because Hall Master Yuan had intentionally instructed him to do so. He naturally couldn't blame it on the master of Sky Sword Mountain. On top of that, Jian Wushuang had improved tremendously in Sky Sword Prison. Later, when Wu Bei's cave came into the world, Jian Wushuang traded 2 white blaze fruit in exchange for Fiery King's freedom. They had had dealings before and they could be considered friends. Yeah, someone is after me, the master of Sky Sword Mountain replied, embarrassed. Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and looked at the void behind. He had felt a bolt of raging aura rushing over long ago. In the blink of an eye, the figure appeared before Jian Wushuang. The person was wearing a golden top with messy hair. His beard and mustache were all golden and there was a fire burning in his eyes. The feeling it gave was like a raging beast. Judging from his look, he should be the Golden Lion, right? Jian Wushuang scoffed. Golden Lion was a nickname from experts of the same level. Those cultivators who were weaker would refer to him reverently as Emperor God Golden Lion. Emperor God Golden Lion was mad by nature and he was quite famous in Eternal Chaotic World. He had only been a top Sir God previously. He had broken through and became an Emperor God when Head found an opportunity on the ancient battlefield. Many years ago, I had a deep enmity with the Golden Lion. Hell stop at nothing to kill me. He was only a Sir God back then and I wasn't afraid of him. But now, the master of Sky Sword Mountain smiled bitterly. Then, Golden Lion looked over like a beast looking at its prey. His hysterical laughter reverberated in the universe. Tian Jian, why aren't you running anymore? Go ahead and run. I'll chase after you no matter how long you run away. No matter where you run to, I will not let you go. Golden Lion, it's my fault that I killed your disciple. But I didn't know his identity then. Plus, I already took the initiative to see you and apologized. Do you have to be so persistent? The master of Sky Sword Mountain roared. Haha, that's a joke. You know my temperament. As you have offended me, don't even dream about getting off the hook just like that. Between you and I, there'll be no end to this. Golden Lion roared coldly. You. The master of Sky Sword Mountain was pissed off. Jian Wushuang looked enlightened as he finally understood the ins and outs of the story. He immediately said, Emperor God Golden Lion, Tian Jian and I are friends. Plus, he apologized to you about the death of your disciple. You could take advantage of him, but as for killing him, could you please let him off the hook as a courtesy to me? Let him off the hook. Humph. Who are you? I will kill whoever I want. It is none of your business. It's best if you move aside right now. Otherwise, I will kill you both if I am in a bad mood. Same goes to Sir Godmoyu. Golden Lion roared in anger. The master of Sky Sword Mountain and Sir Godmoyu heard and they were shocked. Both of them couldn't help but look at Jian Wushuang. Golden Lion, are you courting death? Sir Godmoyu roared from the bottom of his heart. Jian Wushuang's face grew grave, as expected. Humph. A cold thump reverberated in the universe. Jian Wushuang didn't move at all. There was quite a distance between him and Golden Lion, but as he waved, there was a huge hand that appeared in the void near Golden Lion straight away without any warning. The hand contained a terrifying power and instantly froze the space-time around Golden Lion. He couldn't even move an inch in time. Bang! The huge hand slapped Golden Lion brutally and Golden Lion let out a painful groan. He was slammed onto the barren ground and no one knew if he was dead or alive. The master of Skysword Mountain and Sir God Mo you couldn't help but gulp at the sight, but they weren't surprised. Golden Lion was an emperor god, a top expert. But what was he in front of the legendary Sword Emperor? Sword Emperor challenged the entire Eternal Chaotic World alone. He had even forced everyone in Eternal Chaotic World to give in. Although it was mostly because of the grand formation in the space-time storm, it showed Sword Emperor's capability. Plus, Sword Emperor had already broken through. Forget about an Emperor God who had just broken through not too long ago, even a peak Emperor God, like Emperor God Tianling, an invincible Emperor God or Underworld God, had to bow down before Sword Emperor. Hualala. There was a large number of shattered stones that dispersed and fell into the huge pit on the ground. There was a miserable figure who slowly got to his feet. The figure was naturally Golden Lion. However, Golden Lion had lost his imposing manner earlier. He only looked to be in a fix and a wretched situation. He also looked more fearful. His gaze was fixed upon Jian Wushuang and was filled with terror. He then slowly spoke, You are Sword Emperor? That's me." Jian Wushuang's face was cold. "You're really him." Golden Lion's face changed. He was arrogant and obstinate. He was truly a madman and he didn't care about the story of the experts in Eternal Chaotic World. He had heard of Jian Wushuang but he had never watched any mirror image of him before. Hence, he couldn't recognize Jian Wushuang at first glance. The most crucial part was that Jian Wushuang had broken through and the aura given out was of Sir God level, not real God. Hence, when he saw a Sir God, he naturally didn't associate him with Sword Emperor until he attacked. Then, he realized. He understood that he was in big trouble. Chapter 1992 The Early Bird Catches the Worm. Big trouble. Emperor God Golden Lion knew how scary Sword Emperor was. He could offend anyone but he happened to offend Sword Emperor and he just hit it directly in vain. Emperor God Golden Lion felt bitter but mostly, he was glad. He was glad that Sword Emperor held back and didn't kill him directly. Otherwise, Golden Lion, I'm asking you. Are you willing to let him off the hook? Jian Wushuang asked with a deep voice and there was chilliness in his eyes. In the beginning, he was considered gentle. Who knew Emperor God Golden Lion would behave so recklessly and blindly? Jian Wushuang, of course, wouldn't treat him politely anymore. Yes, Emperor God Golden Lion didn't dare to complain further. Hurry up and get lost. Jian Wushuang roared. Emperor God Golden Lion immediately left and didn't delay any further. Thank you for the help, Sword Emperor. The owner of Skysword Mountain immediately bowed to Jian Wushuang. No big deal. You and I are friends, Jian Wushuang waved casually. Oh yeah. You came to Juju Sword Mansion for the 9 sword steelies, right? Yes, the owner of Skysword Mountain nodded. I originally wanted to try my luck. Who knew there was a test at every sword steely and not just anyone could get it? I was in Juju Sword Mansion for a few days but I didn't get any sword steely. I met this Golden Lion and nearly lost my life. There's a test at every sword steely? Jian Wushuang was surprised but it wasn't unexpected. Jian, as you have been here in Juju Sword Mansion for quite some time, you should have come across a few sword steelies, right? Yeah. I found 3 sword steelies in the past few days. But it is a pity that I didn't get any one of them. The owner of Skysword Mountain smiled bitterly. Can you bring me to the 3 sword steelies then? Jian Wushuang asked. Of course, the owner of Skysword Mountain naturally wouldn't refuse. Under the lead of the owner of Skysword Mountain, Jian Wushuang immediately went to where the 3 sword steelies were located. Jian Wushuang arrived at the first sword steely very quickly. That is the sword steely. Jian Wushuang looked at a green steely towering in the middle of the barren field. The green steely was huge and it was made of unique green crystals. Even though Jian Wushuang was experienced, He couldn't tell what the green crystal was. The green crystal gave out an ancient aura and there was a spiraling tunnel underneath. One could enter the sword steely through the tunnel to sit for the test. At the very moment, there were 3 cultivators by the side of the green sword steely. The 3 cultivators were an emperor god and 2 sir gods. When they saw Jian Wushuang's arrival, their eyes dilated in shock. "Greetings, Sword Emperor. Greetings, Sword Emperor." The 3 of them bowed politely simultaneously. "Come on," Jian Wushuang waved. "There's someone in the sword steely now?" "Yes," the Emperor God replied. "Master Wu just went in not too long ago." "Master Wu?" Jian Wushuang was taken by surprise. In eternal chaotic world, before Jian Wushuang rose, before Jian Yi and Lord Sound Spirit and the others appeared, there was only a total of 15 great emperors. 13 of them were from Sanctuary Alliance and there were 2 out of Sanctuary Alliance. It was widely known by the public. In the great eternal chaotic world, it was normal that there would be 1 or 2 great emperors that people didn't know. For instance, Master Wu wasn't famous back then until the ancient battlefield appeared. He started wandering on the ancient battlefield and gained fame in the public. He was extremely powerful and was listed at the 8th place on Heaven and Earth Supreme ranking list. Master Wu is good with a sword too. It is very normal that he came to wander in Juju Sword Mansion. Jian Wushuang nodded faintly. "Sword Emperor, only 1 person is permitted to enter to sit for the test in the sword steely at one time. As Master Wu is sitting for the test in the sword steely, we can only wait outside," the owner of Sky Sword Mountain explained. "All right then." Jian Wushuang smiled but wasn't bothered much. The time flew past. In the blink of an eye, half a day had passed. There was finally movement in the huge sword steely. The sword steely quivered slightly and was suddenly diminished at a terrifyingly fast speed. Looking at the sight, Jian Wushuang and the others immediately understood that Master Wu had definitely passed the test. So, the sword steely belonged to him. "We came late." Jian Wushuang let out a sigh but he couldn't do anything about it either. Master Wu had already taken the sword steely as he had arrived first. It was Master Wu's ability to pass through the test and obtain the sword steely. Hence, Jian Wushuang couldn't do anything about it. As for the owner of Sky Sword Mountain, Sir God Mo Yu and the rest could only be envious. The tall sword steely vanished into thin air and it was replaced by a brawny man who was 3 meters tall. The tall man carried a broad and heavy sword on his back. He himself was just like a mountain and the fierce aura given out by the mountain not only made one feel pressured, but also eerie. The tall, brawny man was Master Wu. Jian Wushuang stood there with his hands on his back when he looked at Master Wu. Master Wu felt Jian Wushuang gaze and he looked back. Both of their eyes met and the void instantly froze. The owner of Sky Sword Mountain, Sir God Mo Yu and the others around them gulped and held their breaths. Master Wu was a great emperor. As for Jian Wushuang, he was also a superb existence. He had obviously already broken through. His fighting power shouldn't be second to great emperors either. In front of the 2 superb existents, they were, of course, nervous. At the same time, they were surprised. Would the 2 of them fight here? Judging from their behavior, they did look like they were going to fight. But in the end, let's go. Jian Wushuang suddenly turned and told the owner of Sky Sword Mountain. The owner of Sky Sword Mountain didn't hesitate and immediately turned to leave. Master Wu reined in his gaze and left as well. There were only the 3 cultivators, who were waiting outside the sword steely earlier, left standing at the original spot. Then, the 3 cultivators had yet to calm down. Either Sword Emperor would fight with Master Wu over the sword steely, but it didn't seem like it just now. Humph, Master Wu is a true great emperor, in 8th place on Heaven and Earth Supreme ranking list. But Sword Emperor, although he broke through, I reckon his true power has barely passed the threshold of a great emperor's. His sword servant isn't with him either. What does he have to take things away from Master Wu? Millimeter, that's true. Sword Emperor wouldn't ask for a snub when he knew that he wasn't his match. The 3 of them chatted casually. Chapter 1993 Master Wu, Juju Sword Mansion, in the broad void above. Tianjian, How far away are we from the second sword stele? Jian Wushuang asked. Not too far away. With our traveling speed, we will arrive in half an hour, the owner of Skysword Mountain said politely. All right then. Let's head over to the second sword stele, Jian Wushuang smiled. The owner of Skysword Mountain naturally obeyed. As for the reason why Jian Wushuang didn't fight with Master Wu to get the sword stele, the owner of Skysword Mountain didn't ask even though he was curious. Half an hour later, Jian Wushuang arrived at the second sword stele. But Jian Wushuang only saw a barren land when he arrived. He didn't see any sword stele. How could this be? When I left, the second sword stele was still towering here. Why did it disappear? The owner of Skysword Mountain creased his eyebrows. It seems like we are late, Jian Wushuang smiled helplessly. Master Wu had taken the first sword stele earlier. Then, someone else had taken the second stele as well. Then, there was only the third one left. Come on, let's head over to the third sword stele. The three of them continued their journey and they soon arrived at where the third sword stele was located. It was also the last sword stele that the owner of Skysword Mountain knew of. He was lucky enough. The sword stele was still towering there. Although there were people trying to pass the test to obtain the sword stele, they failed to do so. Sword Emperor, the person who sat for the test in the sword stele came out, the owner of Skysword Mountain said. Millimeter, Jian Wushuang nodded. He saw a Sir God exited from the space whirlpool of the sword stele and he looked disappointed. He obviously hadn't passed the test. Without hesitation, Jian Wushuang walked towards the sword stele. There were a few cultivators around the sword stele. They were looking at Jian Wushuang as he walked over. Jian Wushuang arrived before the sword stele and prepared to enter the space whirlpool to sit for the test. Just then, swoosh, a figure plunged over from afar. In two simple flashes, he appeared next to Jian Wushuang and before the sword stele. Jian Wushuang creased his eyebrows and looked at the person who came. In a black robe, tall and brawny, carrying a broad and heavy sword. It was Master Wu that Jian Wushuang had seen not too long ago. Such a coincidence, Jian Wushuang smiled faintly. Jian Wushuang already met Master Wu at the first sword stele. However, they didn't have any contact then. Then, as he arrived at the third sword stele, Master Wu rushed over too. The test in this sword stele, I'll take it first. You can wait until I am done before you head out to try, Master Wu said coldly in an indisputable tone. You first. Why? Jian Wushuang couldn't help but scoff at him. The test in the sword stele couldn't be taken by two people at the same time. Only one at a time. Under such circumstances, whoever headed in first would have the absolute opportunity. Because if the first person passed the test, the sword stele would belong to him. What chance would the second person have? Jian Wushuang had no alternative for the first sword stele. But, Master Wu, everything in on the basis of time of arrival, Jian Wushuang said coldly. Time of arrival? I'm sorry, there is no such thing in my head. Speak with power. Get out of my way, Master Wu bellowed and intended to take a stride forward. Just then, there was a sudden gale. Master Wu's face grew grave. He realized that there was a shapeless sword intention that aimed at his skull. He hauled his footsteps. Humph. He humphed coldly and the sword intention instantly collapsed and dispersed. Master Wu's gaze was cold. He looked at Jian Wushuang like an ancient beast. Jian Wushuang, your sword servant is not with you. With you alone, you are not my match. You'd better know where you stand. Otherwise. Otherwise what? Jian Wushuang sneered. Master Wu, you think too highly of yourself. You are courting death. Master Wu was then raging in anger. Hong. There was a boundless sword intention that burst out like a tsunami. The sea of sword intention filled the universe. The entire spacetime instantly froze. Master Wu suddenly drew his sword in the middle of the sword intention. The moment he struck the sword, it was as though the entire universe pressed down on Jian Wushuang. The terrifyingly huge sword shadow extended its length across tens of thousands of miles in the sea of sword intention. Master Wu, who was at the 8th place on Heaven and Earth Supreme ranking list, he either won't attack, or he'll attack with full force. The sword principle is pretty imposing. Jian Wushuang smiled faintly, but he didn't panic. The terrifyingly huge shadow that was tens of thousands of miles in length appeared before him, and he pointed with his right index finger. The ancient god's eighth finger, the universe finger. One finger to shake heaven and earth. Rumble. The void gradually collapsed. Under the boundless divine power and power of ancient tribe bloodline, there was a huge finger that looked like it extended from ancient times in the collapsing void. The very next moment, it collided directly with the terrifyingly huge sword shadow. Bang! There was a loud bang, and everything in the world faded away. The surrounding void shattered and the entire universe was lifted. Just like the owner of Sky Sword Mountain, Sir God Mo Yu, and the others, they scattered around long ago. Luckily, they had retreated earlier, otherwise the repercussions of their collision could easily have wiped them out. Everything had become nothingness. It was only the sword Steely left towering there. Although the repercussions of both attacks were fierce, it couldn't damage the sword Steely at all. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. The 5 brilliant golden lights suddenly lit up. The 5 resplendent golden lights were like 5 shooting stars that struck across the void and appeared before Master Wu. Master Wu looked cold as he wielded his broad sword continuously. Every stroke contained hundreds of millions of jinns that could easily break mountains and split rivers. Clang, 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 clang. There were 5 continuous clanging noises. All 5 Hongjun golden swords under Jian Wushuang's manipulation of divine power attacked. Although Master Wu resisted the 5 continuous attacks, he couldn't help but take one step back. Jian Wushuang, I belittled you. I never expected you to be so powerful after breaking through and becoming an almighty. You live up to your reputation as an inverse cultivator. However, you must be dreaming if you want to win victory with power alone. Master Wu's voice was cold. Just as he spoke, he raised the broad sword with both his hands at the same time. Vroom vroom vroom. The terrifying extermination aura instantly concentrated on the broad sword. The surrounding universe drowned in an extermination region. Chapter 1994 Face Off. This stroke. Jian Wushuang's expression grew in distress. He could feel that Master Wu's stroke was unusual. It wasn't just how strong the sword intention and sword posture was, but most importantly, the extermination power that it brought about. The extermination power signified that his comprehension of extermination doctrine had already reached the peak in eternal chaotic world. He had reached the level 9 standard in Doctrine Palace. The level 9 in Doctrine Palace. The extreme limit of doctrine. All great emperors in eternal chaotic world reached that level. It was also an important reason as to why Great Emperor was far greater than Emperor God. For instance, Jian Wushuang's comprehension of doctrine was far behind Master Wu's. Because of the addition of extermination power, Master Wu made the stroke even more powerful. It was so powerful that it shocked Jian Wushuang. However, although Jian Wushuang was shocked, he wasn't fearful. Emperor Sword Principle, vroom. Jian Wushuang raised Blood Mountain sword high in the sky. There was a bolt of Emperor mana that swept out. In an instant, Jian Wushuang became an emperor that ruled everything, and he was holding the emperor's sword. As Jian Wushuang wielded the emperor's sword, he immediately displayed a terrifying power. 2 bolts of terrifying sword intention. 2 strokes of sword shadows that could end the world. One was an emperor's sword and the other was an extermination sword. They collided. Vroom. The 2 bolts of sword intention hit, and there was no vigorous bang as one might imagine. There were only noises of sword intention and divine power pressing and shattering. Both Jian Wushuang and Master Wu were raging in anger. At the moment when the 2 sword shadows had yet to call victory or defeat, they competed again. Then, both of them fought in close combat and they were meeting force with force. You do not know what death is. How dare you meet force with force? Master Wu raged in anger. He was using a heavy sword. A heavy sword was thick and heavy, and it was best at pressing with power. However, it wasn't good in terms of speed. As Jian Wushuang fought in close combat with him, he would have relied on the flexibility of his sword principle and his speed under normal circumstances. But now, Jian Wushuang opted to meet force with force. Without any pattern, competing in terms of strength and also power of sword principle. Come on. Master Wu bellowed. No one is afraid. Jian Wushuang roared too. The two of them fought vigorously in the void. Clang, 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 clang. There was a continuous metal clanging noise that was loud and clear. Every single collision contained boundless divine power. The fight plunged the void into complete chaos. The owner of Sky Sword Mountain, Sir God Mo Yu, and the others were dumbfounded at the sight. Especially when they saw Jian Wushuang meeting force with force against Master Wu without having the lower hand. They were astonished at the fact that he didn't lose his imposing manner. One should know that Master Wu had gained fame through victory in fierce fights with his opponents. The reason why he won was not only because of his strength and sword principle that were powerful, but more importantly, because his divine power was strong too. The repercussion of the collision was also powerful. After continuous collisions, any great emperor with weaker divine power wouldn't be able to stay standing. However, Master Wu wasn't fearful because his divine power was strong. Even if he were to hit more than 100 times, he would at most have a mild injury. However, although Master Wu's divine power was strong, he didn't know that Jian Wushuang's divine power was even more ridiculously strong than his. He was an inverse cultivator. The seventh step of inverse cultivation gave him a perfect chaotic divine body. His divine body was entirely substantiated with divine power, which was extremely powerful. Maybe, in terms of divine power strength, it might not be able to match Master Wu's. But his defense armor, 5-gem armor, was far stronger than the chaotic divine treasure that Master Wu was wearing. The truly important part was still his constitution. Forget about the fact that it was difficult to damage his divine body when he fought directly with Master Wu. Even if his divine body was injured, he could instantly recover it with divine power. Injury simple didn't exist in inverse cultivator at this step. As long as one's divine power was sufficient, he would never be injured, nor would he die. It was really even more powerful than Master was. As expected, Master Wu and Jian Wushuang already fought forcefully and hit one another over a few hundred times on the battlefield. Every single hit was a full-force hit. The repercussions of the impact caused injury to Master Wu's divine body and his aura grew weaker. But what about Jian Wushuang? He was still billowing with fighting power. His aura was not diminishing but growing stronger instead. The power in his sword didn't diminish either. How is it possible? This guy is powerful, but how could his defense power be this strong too? We hit one another a few hundred times, but his divine body didn't have any injury at all. How could one have such a terrifying divine body? Master Wu was in disbelief. The situation then shocked him. His divine body was damaged and his fighting power was affected. On the other hand, Jian Wushuang became stronger. If they were to persist, there would be no doubt in the result. Jian Wushuang, I shall let you have this sword steely as you are not weak. Master Wu bellowed and seized the chance to leave immediately. Jian Wushuang stood on the spot as he watched Master Wu leave. He didn't intend to chase after him. 8th place on Heaven and Earth Supreme Ranking List, Master Wu, he is really powerful, Jian Wushuang complimented in silence. Besides the trump cards, like River Mountain Map, Secret Skill of Star Palace, Star Destruction Skill, he used most of his other skills. Even so, he was barely Master Wu's match. In the end, he relied on his advantage in his substitution to meet force with force. Then, he had managed to beat off Master Wu. The fighting power of a great emperor was really unusual. Jian Wushuang could tell that Master Wu had some trump cards that he didn't play. Although I didn't have the upper hand, at least I have a brand new understanding of my power after this fight with Master Wu. With my strength and power that was stronger by one notch than any ordinary great emperor, with all my skills, I should be mid-range among all great emperors on Heaven and Earth Supreme Ranking List, but not the ones at the bottom, Jian Wushuang smiled. He had just broken through not too long ago. He merely relied on his transformed substitution and his divine power to reach where he was. From then on, he had great space for improvement. Forget about the others, in terms of sword principle and comprehension of doctrine, he had great space for improvement. One should know that his comprehension of spacetime doctrine and reincarnation doctrine was only at the standard of level 8 in Doctrine Palace then. When he was fighting against the other great emperors, they were all on the level 9. Jian Wushuang had the lower hand in terms of that. Don't be in a hurry. I just broke through. I have to take my time. First, the 9 sword steles in Juju Sword Mansion are a great opportunity to me. Jian Wushuang lifted the corners of his lip as he fixed his gaze upon the sword stele before him. Chapter 1995 Sword Stele. The fight between Jian Wushuang and Master Wu earlier was extremely ferocious. God knows how many times the surrounding void had collapsed and shattered. The ground was horrible to look at too, as it had become a ruin. However, after such a ferocious fight, the green sword stele was still towering in perfect conditions. Although there were sword lights that hit the sword stele, it wasn't damaged at all. I wonder what material is the sword stele made of. How could it be so tough? Jian Wushuang thought to himself in astonishment while he passed through the space-time whirlpool and entered the sword stele. In the nearby void, a speeding figure stopped. The figure naturally belonged to Master Wu. Then, Master Wu's face grew grave. I never expected Jian Wushuang would be so powerful after breakthrough. In terms of power explosion, he was much stronger than me. His divine power is even scarier, Master Wu muttered. After the earlier battle, he roughly understood Jian Wushuang's power. Although Jian Wushuang had just broken through, he could still be considered as a Sir God. But his fighting power was absolutely not weaker than a great emperor's, and he was not even the ones at the bottom among all great emperors. If it wasn't because his comprehension of doctrines was weaker, Jian Wushuang absolutely could be at the peak among all great emperors. Luckily, although I fought with him, I didn't offend him. Otherwise, when he breaks through again in the future, or when his comprehension towards doctrine heightened, he'll be in big trouble if he remembers me. Inverse cultivators are so scary. Master Wu complimented and continued to leave. It was an empty field inside the sword stele. The test in the sword stele was actually very simple. There was a sword spirit in the sword stele. The person who sits for the test in the sword stele would be fighting against the sword spirit. The sword spirit would maintain its strength at the same level as the cultivator. Then, it would call victory or defeat judging purely by sword principle. As long as one defeated the sword spirit, it meant that he passed the test. The sword principle played by the sword spirit was according to the realm of the cultivator. In terms of the realm, Jian Wushuang was merely a Sir God, which was an early-stage chaotic realm in ancient times. The sword spirit naturally treated him as a cultivator of that level. Although the sword principle it played was meticulous, it could only compare favorably to an emperor god who was good with swords. As for Jian Wushuang, although his understanding of swords was slightly weaker than a great emperor Hs, he was absolutely at the peak of all emperor gods. He defeated the sword spirit with ease and he naturally passed the test. The moment Jian Wushuang passed the test, he possessed the qualifications to cultivate the sword stele. He spent some time and cultivated the sword stele with ease. On the ruin that was too terrible to look at, the owner of Sky Sword Mountain, Sir God Mo Yu and the rest waited in silence. In no time, Jian Wushuang walked out of the sword stele. When he walked out, the sword stele diminished in size at a terrifyingly fast speed. Then, it merged into Jian Wushuang's body. The few of them instantly understood that Jian Wushuang had passed the test. Sword Emperor, congratulations. Congratulations. The owner of Sky Sword Mountain, Sir God Mo Yu and the others came forward to congratulate him and they behaved politely. Before that, they had already noticed that Jian Wushuang had broken through his realm and guessed that Jian Wushuang already possessed the fighting power of a great emperor. However, it was merely a guess after all and it had yet to be verified. Even so, they were already very polite to him. But then, they saw that Jian Wushuang and Master Wu had fought before their own eyes. There was naturally no doubt about Jian Wushuang's power. He was absolutely a super expert at the great emperor level. This time, thanks to Qian Jian and Mo Yu for bringing me. These Qian Kuan rings are your rewards. There's nothing to do with you next. Goodbye, Jian Wushuang passed a Chen Kuan ring to the owner of Skysword Mountain and waved. The owner of Skysword Mountain was surprised. He didn't intend to accept it at first. After all, he only guided the way for Jian Wushuang. Plus, Jian Wushuang had saved his life, so he owed Jian Wushuang a favor. However, he didn't reject it when he looked at Jian Wushuang's expression. The owner of Skysword Mountain and Sir God Mo Yu left after that. Jian Wushuang continued his journey in Juju Sword Mansion. On his way, he started fiddling with the sword stele. As expected, the sword stele contains a large number of sword principles and they are all meticulous and powerful. Their qualities are not found in the ones in this era, Jian Wushuang muttered. He had already cultivated the sword stele and he could clearly feel the sword principle recorded in the sword stele. Jian Wushuang looked through the sword principles in the sword stele and there was a total of 136 of them. Any one of the 136 of them could shake the universe if put in the current era. It was enough to make countless sword cultivators go crazy. Regrettably, the 136 sword principles were all incomplete. There was merely a fragment of the sword principle in the sword stele. For instance, there was a sword principle named Brother Peacock. The Brother Peacock sword principle consisted of 6 moves, but the sword stele only had a fragment of the 6 sword moves. There wasn't even one complete sword move. In other words, even if Jian Wushuang obtained the sword stele, he couldn't practice any of those sword principles in the sword stele. He couldn't even cultivate one move. They are all incomplete sword principles. What is Sword Geek Juju trying to do? Jian Wushuang creased his eyebrows. Could the 9 sword steles contain incomplete sword principles each, and only one who could gather all 9 will receive the complete sword principles? Jian Wushuang felt that it was possible. Then, he started sending messages around to inquire. Since Juju Sword Mansion had come into the world, there were more than 5 sword steles that were taken away. If the sword steles were similar to the one Jian Wushuang had, they only contained fragments of multiple sword principles. The few experts who obtained the sword stele shouldn't be calm. The truth was as such too. When the few experts who had obtained sword steles with sweat and tears realized that the sword steles only contained incomplete sword principles and not even a complete sword move, they couldn't calm themselves down and looked around and asked the others who had obtained the other sword steles. In the end, they came to a conclusion. The sword principles in the sword steles did require combining a few steles together for a complete version. However, there was no need to collect all 9 of them. Under normal circumstances, a sword principle would only be split into 2 or 3 sword steles. Only when they obtained the 2 or 3 sword steles that recorded the sword principle would they be able to cultivate the sword principle. In other words, it was useless to get only 1 sword stele. It seems that I need to figure out ways to get more sword steles. Jian Wushuang creased his eyebrows. Chapter 1996 Incomplete Sword Principle. Jian Wushuang continued to wander in Juju Sword Mansion for the rest of the time. The 9 sword steles in Juju Sword Mansion, although there were 5 that were taken, including Jian Wushuang's, there were 4 remaining that were scattered in various corners. The remaining 4 sword steles were found, but because the test was too strict, they were yet to be claimed by anyone. Jian Wushuang had already found the locations of the 4 sword steles through Sanctuary Alliance. Now, he was looking for them, one by one. However, there were too many cultivators that were eyeing the 4 sword steles. There were more than 100 almighties in Juju Sword Mansion who were eyeing the sword steles. There were many among them who were faster than Jian Wushuang. Among the 4 sword steles, there were 3 that had already been claimed by the others when Jian Wushuang rushed over. Only to get the last one did Jian Wushuang manage to get there in time. There was a green sword stele that was towering there. Among the 9 sword steles, it was the last sword stele with no owner. Before the sword stele, there were many experts. They came for the sword stele but they couldn't pass the test. Hence, the experts could only watch even though they knew the sword stele was valuable. Swoosh! Jian Wushuang's body suddenly appeared before the sword stele. The surrounding people immediately looked at Jian Wushuang. It is Sword Emperor. He is finally here. The test in this sword stele, None of us could pass. Even Master Wu, who was powerful, tried it and failed. In Juju Sword Mansion now, the only one who could possibly pass the test should be Sword Emperor. Millimeter, if nothing unexpected happens, Sword Emperor definitely can pass this test. The experts at the scene were extremely confident in Jian Wushuang. They went to try the test in the Sword Steely and they knew the test content of the Sword Steely. Because they knew about the test content, they were certain that only Jian Wushuang can pass the test out of all the cultivators in Juju Sword Mansion. Jian Wushuang didn't delay any further and stepped foot into the Sword Steely before everyone. He appeared in an empty land again and Jian Wushuang was facing a sword spirit again. However, the sword spirit seemed to be different from the sword spirit in the other Sword Steely. Previously, the sword spirit was purely testing the sword principle and it would perform a different level of sword principle according to the cultivator's realm. The sword spirit in this Sword Steely would still perform according to the cultivator's realm, but the cultivator was supposed to take up a skip stage challenge. For instance, Jian Wushuang was a Sir God, but the fighting power that the sword spirit displayed was the level of an Emperor God. Skip stage challenge. In other words, a Sir God had to defeat an Emperor God in order to pass the test. An Emperor God had to defeat a Great Emperor directly. Great Emperor was a Great Emperor, so who knew how powerful the sword spirit that he fought against would be? However, the skip stage challenge might be nothing in ancient times, but in the Second Era, it was difficult for one at the almighty level to take up the skip stage challenge. It was almost impossible. For instance, Underworld God, who was widely acknowledged as the number Emperor God, could barely fight with an ordinary Great Emperor. In such a situation, there was naturally no one among the Almighties in Juju Sword Mansion who could pass the test. However, the test that they couldn't pass was too easy for Jian Wushuang. Skip stage challenge? For me to defeat an Emperor God? Jian Wushuang chuckled. The sword spirit only recognized realms but didn't know the scariness of Jian Wushuang as an inverse cultivator. Hence, the sword spirit only revealed the fighting power of an ordinary Emperor God. Jian Wushuang could easily kill an ordinary Emperor God before the breakthrough, let alone now. In an instant, the sword spirit was defeated by Jian Wushuang and the last sword Steely fell into Jian Wushuang's hand as he wanted. Then, Jian Wushuang had 2 sword Steelies in his hands. 2 sword Steelies. I hope there will be a complete sword principle. Jian Wushuang was looking forward to it. He started inspecting the new sword Steely carefully. After reading through, Jian Wushuang was disappointed. Or it should be said that he was too unlucky. Then, the sword Steelies that he had gotten then were vastly different from the sword Steely that he obtained earlier. Previously, the sword Steely had contained 136 sword principles. But now, the new one only contained 108. Most importantly, among the 108 sword principles, only 12 were associated with the 136 sword principles. To make it worse, the associated 12 sword principles were still incomplete. In other words, the 12 sword principles still required another sword Steely. He just left behind some sword principles. Does Juju have to make it this troublesome? Jian Wushuang was distressed. A total of 9 sword Steelies, he got 2 Steelies alone, which are considered the best. However, even though he got 2 at the same time, he still couldn't cultivate any one of the sword principles or even one move. Juju scattered the ancient sword principle so complicatedly onto the 9 sword Steelies. If I were to be unlucky, even if I got 4 or 5 sword Steelies, I still might not be able to get a complete ancient sword principle. Let alone in the current situation where I just got myself 2 sword Steelies. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes. He was sure that even if he relied on his power to grab the sword Steelies from the others, he might be able to get a sword principle that he was happy with. Even so, there was only one route in front of him. Among the 12 sword principles that are more complete, I shall pick 1 or 2 that are most suitable for myself. Then, I shall ask the experts who got a sword Steely one by one. After that, we will negotiate an exchange and I can get the sword Steely from them, Jian Wushuang thought to himself. In the beginning, he was thinking of getting a large number of ancient sword principles from the 9 sword Steelies. At least 10 to 20 of them, but then, he couldn't even dream of getting 10 ancient sword principles. He would be satisfied if he could get 1 or 2 complete ancient sword principles. Jian Wushuang immediately started to choose among the 12 sword principles that were closer to completion. Every one of the 12 sword principles was powerful and meticulous. Even though the 12 sword principles were incomplete, Jian Wushuang still knows some simple information. 9th heaven stroke, 9 sword move, 1 move to the 1st heaven. Jian Wushuang looked through the information about the 12 sword principles and tried very hard to pick the one that suited him the most. Chapter 1997 Sword Principle Xian Luo. Any one of the 12 sword principles would be a first-rate sword principle in ancient times. It would be even more impressive in the current era. Jian Wushuang looked through it carefully and chose 3 sword principles in the end. The 3 sword principles were more suitable for him. Among the 3 sword principles, Jian Wushuang was looking forward to getting sword principle Xian Luo the most. Sword principle Xian Luo was created by a sword expert in ancient times named Xian Luo, and he named the sword principle after himself. There was a total of 4 moves in the sword principle, but it wasn't the kind of unique skill whereby the second move would be stronger than the first. It contained 4 sword moves that covered different regions and different natures. There was 1 move in the sword principle that focused on power, 1 focused on speed, 1 focused on defense, and 1 focused on the instant explosion of power and penetrating power. 4 of the moves were using a sword as a basis and comprehension of doctrine as auxiliary. On top of that, regardless of the doctrine that one comprehended, he could still give full play to the 4 moves in the sword principle. Any move from the 4 moves in sword principle would be nothing, but the combination of 4 moves could be a perfectly flawless sword principle if played during a fierce fight. Even the sword geek Juju left a message on the sword stele to express his admiration of that particular sword principle. Back then, when Juju fought with the ancient expert, Xian Luo, who had created the sword principle, he couldn't find any flaw in his opponent's sword principle. Hence, he couldn't seize any opportunity. In the end, he had relied on his pure divine power to win against his opponent unconvincingly. Among the ancient sword principles contained in the sword steles, sword principle Xian Luo could be considered a high-grade one. Sword principle doesn't need to be brilliant and luxurious, nor does it need so many moves. As long as it is practical, it will do, Jian Wushuang said. In terms of a master stroke, I already have an emperor sword principle. It required time to accumulate power. It purely focused on the power of sword principle that was extremely fierce. During an actual fight, there will be hardly any chance for you to accumulate power, especially if it is a close combat fight. As for sword principle Xian Luo, it includes both attack and defense in one. It is almost flawless. As I could perform it in an instant during close combat, it absolutely could make up the deficiency in my swordsmanship. Jian Wushuang preferred sword principle Xian Luo over the other 2 sword principles. Of course, he had only gotten 2 sword steles and sword principle Xian Luo was still incomplete. These 2 sword steles contained more than half of sword principle Xian Luo. The rest of it should be in another 1 sword stele, Jian Wushuang muttered. But first, he had to find out whose hand the final sword stele that contained the rest of sword principle Xian Luo was in. Jian Wushuang immediately sent out messages to check. With Jian Wushuang's current power and position, it was too easy for him to find out things, especially things about the sword steles. In no time, Jian Wushuang found his answer. A few days later, on a spacious land on the ancient battlefield, Jian Wushuang stood there in silence. In a short while, a poised lady in a purple robe plunged over from afar and stopped before Jian Wushuang. Han Yi greets Sword Emperor. The poised lady in a purple robe bowed politely to Jian Wushuang to show respect. Emperor God Han Yi, there is no need to be so courteous, Jian Wushuang smiled. You should know why I looked for you, right? Sword Emperor is interested in the sword stele in my hand. Emperor God Han Yi lifted his head. Yes, Jian Wushuang nodded. To be exact, I am referring to only sword principle in your sword stele, sword principle Xian Luo. In the sword stele that I have, there is sword principle Xian Luo. However, Emperor God Han Yi hesitated. I want your sword steely, and I naturally wouldn't just take it for free. What are your conditions? What resources and treasures do you want? Tell me, Jian Wushuang asked. He had once killed 100 Almighties from Almighty's alliance. On top of that, he had massacred over the years. The number of resources and treasure he had was terrifyingly abundant. Emperor God Han Yi was only an ordinary emperor god. Even if she brought up an exceedingly great request, Jian Wushuang would be able to fulfill it. Let alone the fact that Emperor God Han Yi shouldn't have the guts to be unreasonable. Emperor God Han Yi's expressions changed multiple times, and there was a flash of hesitation before she said solemnly, Sword Emperor, I don't need any resources or treasure. I only need a favor from you. A favor? Jian Wushuang was taken by surprise. Try me. Jian Wushuang wasn't in a hurry. He had his limits. If the favor that Emperor God Han Yi asked for was just a simple matter, he naturally wouldn't refuse her. However, if the favor were to be troublesome or complicated and required some effort to carry out, or even had risk, Jian Wushuang would definitely not agree with it. Although Sword Principal Xian Luo was impressive and Jian Wushuang was looking forward to getting it, it was merely a fraction of the Sword Principal. It wasn't worth Jian Wushuang putting in too much effort to get it. Emperor God Han Yi took a deep breath and lowered her voice. Sword Emperor, do you know that I have an enemy? Enemy? You mean Yang Zun? Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes. After he found out that the sword steely that contained the last bit of Sword Principal Xian Luo was in Emperor God Han Yi's hand, Jian Wushuang did a background check on Emperor God Han Yi. Emperor God Han Yi did have an enemy, and it was the kind that shared profound hatred. The enemy of hers was Yang Zun. Yang Zun, who was last among all great emperors on Heaven and Earth Supreme ranking list. Emperor God Han Yi, you are not thinking to ask me to kill Yang Zun on your behalf, right? Jian Wushuang's gaze became cold. Although Yang Zun was in last place among all great emperors, he was still a great emperor. How powerful must one be to be able to kill a great emperor? On Heaven and Earth Supreme ranking list, besides Emperor Bai, no one else could do that. Even Red Dragon King on the second place, right below Emperor Bai, even if he launched a full force attack and paid a price, it would still not be definite that he could kill Yang Zun. Unless there were 2 to 3 great emperors joining forces, then there would be a chance. If Jian Wushuang were to join forces with Jian Yi and play some trump cards, they might be able to kill Yang Zun. However, for a fraction of Sword Principal, he had to kill a great emperor? That was impossible. Sword Emperor, you misunderstood me. It is only a sword steely. How can I ask Sword Emperor to kill Yang Zun for me? I only wanted Sword Emperor to teach Yang Zun a lesson. You don't have to kill him, but let him be in a fix and embarrass him. That will do, Emperor God Han Yi said. Just to embarrass him? Jian Wushuang was surprised. It would be simple if he was only required to embarrass him. It seems that your hatred of Yang Zun is unusual. With any slight chance, you'd want to use it against him. Jian Wushuang looked at Emperor God Han Yi curiously. Emperor God Han Yi's eyes were immediately filled with boundless hatred and murderous intention. Chapter 1998 Challenge Yang Zun. The B***starred Yang Zun killed my husband and my daughter. I am dying to drink his blood and eat his flesh. Emperor God Han Yi sounded extremely cold and brutal. The hatred between her and Yang Zun was too profound. It was a pity that she wasn't powerful enough and she couldn't take revenge. However, with any chance that she got, she would try to fight Yang Zun. Even if it meant only embarrassing Yang Zun, it was enough for her to pay a great price to get it done. That was hatred. I can promise you that I will find Yang Zun and vent your anger on your behalf, Jian Wushuang said. Thank you, Sword Emperor. Emperor God Han Yi was surprised. Wait for me here, Jian Wushuang said. Then, he turned and left to find Yang Zun. There were many regions on the boundless ancient battlefield that had yet to be discovered. In the void above the ancient battlefield, where the space gap was at. Vroom. There were lofty palaces and pavilions towering in the sky that formed rolling buildings. The buildings were built by Sanctuary Alliance on the ancient battlefield. There were countless experts from Sanctuary Alliance that wandered on the ancient battlefield. They needed a place to rest too. Hence, Sanctuary Alliance built a bunch of buildings there. There were many experts in Sanctuary Alliance who would return to the buildings when they were tired from exploring the ancient battlefields. At that very moment, Jian Wushuang arrived before the buildings. Yang Zun. Jian Wushuang's loud and bright voice reverberated across the sky. There were many experts from Sanctuary Alliance in the buildings who heard the voice. Of course, that included Yang Zun. Swoosh. Swoosh. There were two figures that plunged out from the buildings in the first instant. Besides Yang Zun, there was another tall and sturdy middle-aged man in golden armor. Oh, Great Emperor Tian Yu is here too? Jian Wushuang glanced at the tall and sturdy middle-aged man in golden armor. In Eternal Chaotic World, there were 13 Great Emperors from Sanctuary Alliance. Among the 13 Great Emperors, there were 10 of them who were masters of a sanctuary. Great Emperor Tian Yu was the master of Sky Mountain Sanctuary. His power should be below average standard among all Great Emperors. Oh, it's Sword Emperor. Both Yang Zun and Great Emperor Tian Yu looked surprised when they saw Jian Wushuang. Both of them also noticed Jian Wushuang's Sir God aura and they knew that Jian Wushuang had broken through. I wonder why Sword Emperor is looking me for. Yang Zun smiled and asked Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang and he did not share any resentment. Even before Jian Wushuang grew strong, he had never revealed any murderous intention to Jian Wushuang. Hence, he wasn't worried that Jian Wushuang would do anything to him. Jian Wushuang smiled and replied, Yang Zun, as you can see, I just broke through and I have yet to determine my power accurately. Hence, I came to look for Yang Zun to challenge you. Challenge? Yang Zun was shocked. In Eternal Chaotic World, it was normal that cultivators would challenge one another. However, when one's power reached the Great Emperor level, they cared about their position and status. Hence, they wouldn't fight easily. They wouldn't take the initiative to challenge one another if there wasn't a reason behind it as well. However, Jian Wushuang, although Yang Zun was confused, he replied with a smile, if so, let's find an independent space to fight a hearty battle then. Independent space? There's no need to. The ancient battlefield is so huge. We can just fight nearby, Jian Wushuang smiled. Such a joke. He came to find trouble intentionally so that Yang Zun would be embarrassed. If they were to fight in an independent space, there would only be the two of them but no other spectator. Even if Yang Zun were defeated, it wouldn't affect his reputation. Here! Yang Zun creased his eyebrows and he found it weird. Yang Zun, get ready. I am going to fight now. Jian Wushuang flashed a malicious smile and he moved. Swoosh. Jian Wushuang was like a ghost. He disappeared and reappeared before Yang Zun. He already withdrew Blood Mountain sword on his back. Reincarnation sword principle. Buzz. The sword light slashed and it was as though it contained a full reincarnation cycle. Jian Wushuang exploded his divine power and ancient tribe bloodline power to his extreme limit. The stroke was enough to split heaven and earth. What is Jian Wushuang trying to do? He challenged me out of nowhere and he didn't want to go into independent space either. Regardless of what his intention is, as he wants to fight, I will fight a battle with him. He is alone, after all. Even if he has already broken through, he is at most one with the fighting power of a great emperor. I can easily deal with him. I will dismiss him after a short fight. Yang Zun was still trying to figure out Jian Wushuang's intention and was in deep thought. When Jian Wushuang appeared before him and slashed, only then he came back to reality. This stroke, Yang Zun's face changed. He flipped his hand and there was a red battle axe. The battle axe contained a fiery flame and he suddenly slammed it down. Hong. That stroke seemed to have the power to burn every living thing in the universe. Although Yang Zun was at the bottom among all great emperors, he was still extraordinarily strong. However, just as the red battle axe collided with Jian Wushuang's Blood Mountain sword. Buzz. Yang Zun's divine body shook and his aura churned. Then, the muscles all over his body flew out like he was lobbing a shell. Just as the muscles were shot out, his body continued to boil. His body finally stopped after a while. After he steadied himself, Yang Zun couldn't help but look at his hands. His right hand was numb and it was aching. How is this possible? Yang Zun was astonished. He thought Jian Wushuang would at most have the fighting power of an ordinary great emperor after a breakthrough. Although he was at the bottom of all great emperors, it shouldn't be a problem to deal with Jian Wushuang. But in the end, he was knocked senseless by the stroke that contained terrifying power. The power contained in the stroke was too powerful. From that stroke itself, he could tell that Jian Wushuang was absolutely not weaker than him but even stronger than him. At least, in terms of power and strength, he was far behind Jian Wushuang. "Ha, Yang Zun, you and I shall fight a hearty battle today." Jian Wushuang laughed and raged. His body increased in size and there were extra heads and arms popping out of his body. A total of 9 heads and 18 arms. 9 heads and 18 arms, Jian Wushuang had already mastered the secret skill entirely. At the same time, Jian Wushuang took out a token. The token was a mirror token specially to record this battle. "Come on." Jian Wushuang came before Yang Zun again. He waved his 18 arms and fought at close quarters with Yang Zun. Chapter 1999 Trampled. Wow. 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 There were continuous sword lights that whistled out from Jian Wushuang's 18 arms. Simultaneously, there were 5 Hongjun golden swords that attacked at terrifyingly fast speed. Besides some trump cards, Jian Wushuang gave full play to his fighting power. One should know that Jian Wushuang was match when he fought force with force back then. He had yet to perform 9 head 18 arms then as well. In other words, the fighting power that he revealed was much stronger than when he had fought with Master Wu. It was hard to call a victory or defeat when Master Wu, who was in the 8th place on Heaven and Earth Supreme Ranking list, fought with Jian Wushuang, who revealed such power. Let alone Yang Zun, who was at the bottom of all great emperors. Of course, it was unstoppable. Hence, there was no suspense in the battle. Yang Zun was suppressed entirely since the very beginning. In merely a short while, the situation had become a one-sided trampling. Yes, he was ruthlessly trampled on. Jian Wushuang put his full fighting power to play and ruthlessly trampled on Yang Zun. Although Yang Zun was angry and aggrieved, he couldn't find any opportunity to counterattack under Jian Wushuang's Hongjun Golden Sword and close combat. The vast difference in terms of strength and power suppressed him completely and he was devastated. Many people saw that battle. The place where they fought was near to the buildings. There were many experts from Sanctuary Alliance who flew above the buildings to watch in the void. Swoosh! A chubby, bald young man stood at the border of the battlefield. "These two. Sword Emperor and the other one is Yang Zun? What's going on? Why are the two of them together?" The bald young man looked shocked. It seems that Sword Emperor came to visit and said that he wants to challenge Yang Zun. Then, this happened, the Sir God next to him explained. Sword Emperor challenged Yang Zun? I have never heard of Yang Zun offending Sword Emperor though. Why did Sword Emperor come to challenge him? How is this a challenge? He is obviously trampling on him, the bald young man exclaimed. Who knows? Anyway, Yang Zun is doomed, the Sir God sighed. The surrounding experts from Sanctuary Alliance were then complimenting and sighing. They first complimented Jian Wushuang's power. They never expected that Jian Wushuang's fighting power would be that strong after the breakthrough. He could suppress Yang Zun with thunderous measures. On the other side, they pitied Yang Zun. Yang Zun looked too pathetic then. Jian Wushuang suppressed him and ruthlessly trampled on him. Even though he was angry, he couldn't do anything about it. At the same time, they were trying to guess what had happened between Yang Zun and Jian Wushuang as well. From their viewpoints, the two of them definitely shared deep enmity and thought it must be that Yang Zun had offended Jian Wushuang somehow or other. Otherwise, Jian Wushuang absolutely wouldn't ruthlessly trample on Yang Zun in front of so many people. It was legit give him tight slaps in public. Sword Emperor, I lost this battle. Hurry up and stop. Yang Zun had admitted defeat long ago. However, Jian Wushuang pretended to not hear. He never stopped his actions but continued to trample on him mercilessly. Yang Zun was furious. At the border of the battlefield, Great Emperor Tian Yu was astonished too. He was astonished because of the power that Jian Wushuang displayed. Although Yang Zun is at the bottom in all great emperors, there is no doubt about his power. However, in front of Sword Emperor, he couldn't even counter-attack but is suppressed entirely and trampled on mercilessly. Jian Wushuang's power. Great Emperor Tian Yu squinted his eyes and understood the power of Jian Wushuang. There's no doubt that Jian Wushuang had the fighting power of a great emperor. Among all great emperors, he wasn't at the bottom but at an average level, or even above average. But he had just broken through. The battle between Jian Wushuang and Yang Zun lasted for 15 minutes. In other words, Yang Zun had been trampled on for 15 minutes. Jian Wushuang finally stopped. Swoosh! Yang Zun instantly became a flowing light and burst out. Then, he kept his distance from Jian Wushuang. When he looked at Yang Zun had already lost his composure. His hair was messy and the armor he wore had faint white dots that were left behind by Jian Wushuang. On top of that, he looked extremely pale and there was blood at the corner of his lips. He looked like he was in a fix. B*****. Yang Zun clenched his fists. His eyes were looking at Jian Wushuang and burning with fire. A great emperor expert was already the top superb existence in eternal chaotic world. When one's power reached such a level, they would care most about their reputation. Then, he was ruthlessly trampled on before everyone by Jian Wushuang and he was trampled on for so long. His reputation was all gone. Then, there were suspicious gazes around him. There were even people smiling smugly at his failure. He was dying to find a place to hide. He naturally clenched his teeth with hatred of Jian Wushuang, who had caused all of this to happen. Yang Zun, goodbye. Jian Wushuang let out a burst of hearty laughter and then left. The surrounding experts were confused at the sight. From the beginning until the end, Sword Emperor didn't reveal the reason why he had challenged Yang Zun and trampled him so badly. As for the reason he mentioned about verifying his power after his breakthrough, no one believed that. As Jian Wushuang left, no one continued to ask but immediately spread the news. Jian Wushuang had already broken through. He had become an almighty from a real god. After he broke through, he found Yang Zun, who was at the bottom among all great emperors, and challenged him. Then, he had ruthlessly trampled on Yang Zun with thunderous measures. The moment the news spread, all experts in eternal chaotic world received the news in an instant. Very soon, there was more news. It was about the fight between Jian Wushuang and Master Wu in Juju Sword Mansion. Jian Wushuang and Master Wu had fought face to face. In the end, they were evenly matched. The news once again proved Jian Wushuang's power. In eternal chaotic world, there were many experts who were astonished. They knew that Jian Wushuang would definitely improve greatly in power once he had a breakthrough and become an almighty, but they had never expected him to improve so tremendously. He had just broken through and he could be evenly matched with Master Wu and could trample on Yang Zun. The others had already recognized his power. Jian Wushuang could be in the top 10 on Heaven and Earth Supreme ranking list. Chapter 2000 Demon King came into the world. In a lofty palace. There was a total of 3 almighties knelt down on the ground in fear. Find out for me. I'd like to know who is the one who is so capable that they could ask Sword Emperor to deal with me on their behalf. You must find out for me. I want to chop him into pieces. Yang Zun then was like a raging beast. His face was red and he was raging in anger. The 3 persons who knelt before him were experts under his command. Yang Zun was certain that he had never offended Jian Wushuang. Even during the time when they were resolving the matter of Green Fire World, he was merely speaking on behalf of Sanctuary Alliance. It couldn't be considered offending Jian Wushuang. He never came into contact with Lineage of Star either. Hence, he was certain that Jian Wushuang didn't come to look for him because of personal resentment. The biggest possibility was that other experts got Jian Wushuang to deal with him using an unknown method. He reckoned that the person only wanted Sword Emperor to trample on him to lose their reputation. Then, he was embarrassed. Although it was Jian Wushuang who did it, he could only take it in about it. Because, regardless of Jian Wushuang's power or influence, they were far beyond him. He had great potential too. Hence, Jian Wushuang was not someone he could offend. Hence, He could only vent all his anger on the expert who made Zhen Wushuang did that. Yang Zun used all his connections and started investigating. On the other side, Zhen Wushuang appeared before Emperor God Han Yi again. Take a look at this mirror token. Zhen Wushuang passed Emperor God Han Yi the mirror token. Emperor God Han Yi took it over and looked through it carefully. Then, her eyes were shimmering with joy. After she watched the images in the mirror token, Emperor God Han Yi took a deep breath and bowed politely to Zhen Wushuang. Thank you, Sword Emperor. I trampled Yang Zun on your behalf merely because of the sword steely. There is nothing to thank me for, Zhen Wushuang said coldly. Emperor God Han Yi nodded and immediately handed the sword steely to Zhen Wushuang. Emperor God Han Yi had already refined the sword steely before, which was why Zhen Wushuang could refine it again with ease. After refining it, Zhen Wushuang started inspecting the sword steely. As expected, there was the last fraction of sword principle Shen Luo in it. With the combination of 3 sword steelies, sword principle Shen Luo was then completed. Zhen Wushuang was filled with excitement. Emperor God Han Yi, Zhen Wushuang looked, Yang Zun could become a great emperor and he isn't stupid. I share no resentment with him, but I found trouble with him today on purpose and trampled on him. He should be able to guess that there was someone who paid a price for me to do so. Hence, if nothing unexpected happens, he will stop at nothing to find out who the person is. And, he would find out that it is you very soon. Thank you, Sword Emperor, for your reminder. Emperor God Han Yi nodded. She had made the same speculations and she had already decided to immediately leave the ancient battlefield. As long as she left the ancient battlefield, even if Yang Zun found out that it was her who had made Zhen Wushuang do it, it wouldn't be easy for Yang Zun to find her in the boundless eternal chaotic world. Emperor God Han Yi left while Zhen Wushuang returned to Green Fire World. As for if Yang Zun could find Emperor God Han Yi and if Emperor God Han Yi could survive, Zhen Wushuang didn't care. He merely made a deal with Emperor God Han Yi. Then, the deal had ended. So, everything that followed had nothing to do with him. In Wushuang City, in the secret room, there were 3 green steelies towering there in silence. Zhen Wushuang sat before the 3 green steelies as he carefully comprehended sword principle Shen Luo in the 3 sword steelies. Zhen Wushuang organized sword principle Shen Luo from the 3 sword steelies. Very soon, a complete and powerful sword principle took form in Zhen Wushuang's head clearly. Let's begin. Zhen Wushuang closed his eyes and started comprehending the ancient sword principle Shen Luo with full attention. Time flew past and Zhen Wushuang was absorbed in his cultivation. He went out once in between. He left Green Fire World and the battlefield to go to Lineage of Star. He refined Universe Galaxy in Lineage of Star and moved it to Green Fire World. From then on, Lineage of Star's old lair was set up within Green Fire World. Then, Zhen Wushuang continued to cultivate in seclusion. In the blink of an eye, 1,800 years had passed as he cultivated in seclusion. In the 1,800 years, both the surrounding ancient battlefield and Green Fire World were peaceful. The growing speed of Green Fire World was terrifyingly fast. There were more and more geniuses that came into the world, and they started to come to prominence in Eternal Chaotic World. However, such tranquility was merely on the surface. In the darkness, the waves of chaos were surging. In the darkest place in Eternal Chaotic World, gurgle. There was dark river water that covered the entire universe. The river was just like Akron. The Black River water was like water in Akron. There was where the old lair of Akron Palace was located. Right in the middle of the boundless Akron water, there was a pitch-black pavilion that towered over the floating island. In the pavilion, it was dark. In the darkness, there were figures kneeling in reverence. In one glance, there should be more than dozens of them. All of them were in black robes and the aura that they gave out was powerful. They were all almighties above Sir God level. In front of the figures in black, there was a huge bronze sculpture. The bronze sculpture was about 1,000 jong tall. It had a monster mask on and it had 8 hands. Each of the hands were holding different weapons. At that very moment, the bronze sculpture was quivering vigorously. The 1,000 jong tall body quivered and it shook the mountains and earth. The huge pavilion trembled in the balance too. The figures in black who knelt before the figure lowered their heads further when they noticed the sight. All of them were so nervous that they were holding their breaths. Along with the quiver, the bronze sculpture slowly diminished in size. In a short while, the tall bronze sculpture became a 2-meter-tall brawny man who was in bronze-colored skin. The brawny man was muscular. He had a beard and his hair was messy. His body had a faint foul smell, just like he was a living savage. The moment the savage man appeared, the figures in black who were kneeling down shivered in fear. At the very next moment, everyone got up and cheered. "Welcome Demon King, demon power is here. Welcome Demon King, demon power is here." Their chants continuously reverberated in the dark pavilion. Chapter 2001 White Hair Grey Eyes. How many years? How many years has it been? I finally recovered my power entirely. Ha ha ha. The 2-meter-tall savage man laughed hysterically. His voice reverberated in the pavilion and into the figure in black's ears. After quite some time, he stopped laughing. Then, the savage man's beast-like cold gaze cast onto the person in front of him. This person was different from the figures in black because he was in a white robe. "How's the preparation going?" the savage man asked. "Everything is ready. We are only waiting for Demon King to return," the man in the white robe replied politely. "Very good," the savage man smiled and continued to ask, "How about the other 2 places? How is their preparation going?" "I'm not sure. They should be ready too," the man in the white robe replied. "Humph. If so, what are you waiting for? Send them a message right now. Tell them I want to see them," the savage man commanded. "Yes," the man in the white robe nodded and quickly went to make arrangements. After a few days, in the boundless dark void. The boundless dark void seemed to be out of tune with eternal chaotic world. However, it was not related to ancient times nor the First Era. At the end of the dark void, there was a lofty throne towering. It was the savage man seated on the throne while the man in the white robe standing next to him. However, in the void there were another 2 thrones besides the one the savage man was seated on. Vroom. There was a strange power that started to concentrate. Then, on the throne right opposite the savage man, there was a lady dressed in white that had white gauze over her face. Although the lady dressed in white had her face covered, her body and her temperament were still as enchanting. If she were to remove her gauze, the lady dressed in white might even stir a carnage of war with a word or a smile. "Lung Rushue greets Mr. Demon King." The lady dressed in white appeared before the savage man and she bowed politely to show respect. Looking at the incomer, the savage man creased his eyebrows and bellowed, "What happened? Where did old man Fen go? Why did he send a little girl who is still wet behind the ears over? Lord Fen is at an important stage. He can't be distracted, so I came instead," the lady dressed in white, Lung Rushue replied coldly. "Humph, you're just a little girl. You can represent old man Fen? You can represent Holocaust sect?" The savage man smirked in disdain. "Mr. Demon King," the man in the white robe next to the savage man said softly, "although Lung Rushue wasn't old, her skills are impressive. After Lord Fen went into seclusion, Holocaust sect broke apart like scattered sand. However, not too long ago, Holocaust sect was united by someone using thunderous measures. The person who united Holocaust sect is Lung Rushue. She is not the master of Holocaust sect." "Oh," the savage man exclaimed but sneered, "just little girl and she can unite Holocaust sect. Is it because old man Fen gave his full support? The old man Fen has bad vision. He found a little girl to be his successor. Could it be that old man Fen lived for too long and he has lustful desire churning in him? He was then charmed by this little girl?" Although the savage man was joking, he obviously sounded scornful. Just then, the lady dressed in white who was opposite him, Lung Rushue, suddenly lifted her head. As she lifted her head, there was a special mark that appeared in between her eyebrows. Her eyes turned white without any hint of blood. She had long, black hair but it instantly turned white as well. Her white hair was swaying along with the breeze. There was an unprecedented extermination aura that spread. The extermination aura was entirely different from the power of extermination performed by extermination doctrine. The extermination aura didn't derive from the power of Heavenway but from Lung Rushua herself. White hair, grey eyes, the body of divine providence. Everywhere she passes, there will be no sign of life. The savage man creased his eyebrows and his face grew solemn. He looked at Lung Rushua again and there wasn't any contempt in his eyes anymore. No wonder old man Fen picked you. It turned out that you are the person's successor, the savage man said in a deep voice. When he brought up the person, there was a flash of strange expression in his eyes with a tinge of fear. It was obvious that the person that he was referring to was very terrifying to him. I respect Mr. Demon King, but I hope that when Mr. Demon King speaks, you'll take note of your identity. Otherwise. Lung Rushua, who had white hair and grey eyes, had a flash of unique light in her grey eyes. The light was blurry yet contained boundless demonic power. Amazing, she is already awakened until that state. The savage man was terrified and his stone calmed down significantly. It is merely a misunderstanding. Little girl, no, I mean, Lord Lung, don't misunderstand. Humph. Lung Rushua let out a cold humph and the special mark in between her eyebrows slowly disappeared. Her white hair and grey eyes gradually resumed to its original color. The extermination aura soaring from her body earlier gradually dispersed too. Mr. Demon King, shall we get down to business then? Lung Rushua said coldly. Of course, the savage man smiled. There was no scornful look when he looked at Lung Rushua, but there was no fear in his eyes either. After all, they weren't in ancient times. If in ancient times, he absolutely would be fearful when he saw Lung Rushua. But then, any one of them were restricted. He wasn't even afraid of Emperor 13, who was once in the top 5 during the ancient war back then. He naturally wouldn't be fearful of Lung Rushua as well. Just then, there was a figure that slowly substantiated on the last throne. The figure was covered in blood. It looked just like a bloody statue with an unclear appearance. It was obvious that it was just an incarnation. We are waiting for you, the savage man smiled. Lung Rushua looked at the bloody statue too. Let's be straightforward. We are ready and it is your call. The bloody statue revealed an empty, bloody eye socket as he glanced at the savage man and Lung Rushua. I have no issues, the savage man replied. Holocaust sect is ready. The only thing is that Lord Fen needs a little longer until he can wake up again, Lung Rushua said. As long as you are here, it doesn't matter if old man Fen is here, the savage man said. Lung Rushua looked cold and she didn't reply to that comment. As we are all ready, let's take action according to the agreed plan. All right, the savage man nodded heavily. They had been waiting for this day for a very, very long time. Chapter 2002 The eternal chaotic world was boundless. Besides the core 10 cultivation sanctuaries, there were boundless holy kingdoms that were human territory. There were countless holy kingdoms and they make up 99% of human territories. Among the countless holy kingdoms, one of them was the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire. Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire was located at the border of eternal chaotic world and it was further away from the 10 cultivation sanctuaries. The quality and standard of the cultivators were naturally not as high as those in the 10 cultivation sanctuaries. However, as the monarch of Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire was powerful, he was at the top among chaotic real gods. There was no drastic change in the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire over the years when he ruled Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire. However, that day, vroom. The entire territory that was conquered by the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire suddenly shook vigorously. There was no symptom before the vigorous shake. It happened all of a sudden and it became more and more vigorous. To the point where the space-time became chaotic. The cultivators in the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire, including the higher-up real gods and the monarch of Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire, who was a peak chaotic real god, were astonished. What's going on? In the Imperial City, the monarch of the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire looked cold as he looked down upon the large numbers of cultivators kneeling before him. The people kneeling before him were just as confused. Quick, find out the source of this violent shaking, the monarch of Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire immediately commanded. Very soon, the monarch of the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire found out that the source of the violent shaking was from the boundless dark void. In the territory of the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire, in the middle of the boundless dark void, there was a huge crack. The crack seemed to be a slash by someone with thunderous measures that had caused a crack from the middle of the entire Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire. Too long. The crack was too long, and it was across the vast territory of the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire. After the crack appeared, it was expanding at a terrifyingly fast speed. It was originally a small crack, but it slowly became a gully between heaven and earth. In the gully between heaven and earth, there was a dim light that was growing brighter. What's going on? The monarch and the cultivators in the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire were terrified. They didn't understand what had happened, and they couldn't do anything about it. They could only watch as the gully grew bigger, as the dim light grew brighter. Finally, the dim light reached the border of the gully, and it obviously extended to the other end of the gully as well. In the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire, there was a huge object that descended. It was black but glowing. It was extremely mysterious. It was huge. It extended from the gully and replaced the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire's boundless territory. It was fierce. The moment it appeared, it pressed at Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire like it was breaking a piece of deadwood. The territory of the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire, including countless cultivators, had almost no space for struggle but instantly vanished into thin air. Even the monarch of Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire died an instant death under its pressure. In the blink of an eye, at the very moment it descended, the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire that was originally in the territory vanished into thin air. There wasn't any trace left behind. After the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire disappeared entirely, it descended on the territory. It was huge in size. Its size was equal to the size of a holy kingdom. It was round, and its shape looked exactly like a black steel ball. It gave out an ancient yet mysterious aura. After it landed, it started spinning gradually. As it spun, the mysterious black steel ball slowly moved to the surrounding territory. Its travel speed wasn't fast, but its power was terrifying. Everywhere it passed would be destroyed. The huge, black steel ball that was the size of a vast holy kingdom started moving to the other surrounding holy kingdoms after it landed on the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire. At the surrounding of the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire, it was right next to another huge holy kingdom. The distance between the two holy kingdoms wasn't far. The black steel ball only vanished the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire for less than half a month, and it arrived at the border of the other holy kingdom. When it arrived, its speed didn't diminish but continued to jostle and elbow its way as though it was breaking a piece of deadwood. The worlds and the territories were rolled over by the black steel ball mercilessly. It was just like a huge millstone. It grinds wherever it goes. After it ran through the Holy Kingdom, the territories of the Holy Kingdom were destroyed. After the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire, the other Holy Kingdom vanished into thin air as well. However, the emergence of the black steel ball and the ability to vanish everything caught the attention of the cultivators around the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire. As they were astonished, the cultivators took turns to launch attacks at the black steel ball. But it didn't cause any effect on it at all. There was even an Almighty who got involved personally, but he didn't manage to stop it at all. The black steel ball continued to roll its way without hindrance and wipe out everything along the way. Sanctuary Alliance received the news about the existence of the black steel ball very soon. In an instant, the entire Sanctuary Alliance and the entire eternal chaotic world was astonished. Green Fire World, in a secret room in Wushuang City. In the secret room that was extremely spacious, Jian Wushuang stood holding a sword. There were figures in bronze armor standing around him. The figures in bronze armor were Dao soldiers. There was a total of over 10 of them. Suddenly, the Dao soldiers moved at the same time. Every one of them revealed terrifying power. In terms of power alone, the Dao soldiers absolutely reached the level of a Sir God. There were over 10 Dao soldiers who attacked at the same time while Jian Wushuang only smiled. Vroom. There was a shapeless sword intention that sword and Jian Wushuang turned into a black hole. A black hole that could swallow all power. In the black hole, the sword in his hand was wielded. Wow. 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 There were sword lights that extended from the black hole and collided with the Dao soldiers' fists. Along with the low thuds, the Dao soldiers retreated from the impact. One should know that Jian Wushuang merely used the limited power of a real god since the very beginning. It was far from a Sir God level power. The power exploded was much weaker than the Dao soldiers, and there were more than 10 Dao soldiers that attacked him simultaneously. However, Jian Wushuang blocked the Dao soldiers' attack easily, and he even beat them off. It was a sword principle that Jian Wushuang had performed. Sword principle Xian Luo, one of the 4 moves in the sword principle. Mixed element spirit. Chapter 2003 Supreme Meeting. Mixed element spirit wasn't a sword principle that focused on its form. It focused on the mood, or in other words, sword intention. The sword intention could be combined with the doctrine that a person comprehended perfectly. Jian Wushuang comprehended reincarnation doctrine, and his sword intention could become a reincarnation cycle. For instance, Jian Wushuang turned into a space black hole that revolved like reincarnation and swallowed everything. Although he continuously performed over a dozen strokes and they looked like they were different, in actual fact, he was performing the same sword principle, mixed element spirit. It was merely because there were many patterns and forms. Among the 4 moves in sword principle Xian Luo, mixed element spirit was the most exquisite one. Because of mixed element spirit, people found the sword principle perfect and almost flawless, Jian Wushuang muttered. In ancient times, sword geek Juju hadn't found any flaw in the sword expert who created sword principle Xian Luo. No matter how intense his attacks were, the sword expert managed to defend. If it wasn't because there was a difference in their divine power, it would be impossible for Juju to defeat the sword expert. Hence, mixed element spirit could be said to be the true essence of sword principle Xian Luo. As for the other 3 moves of the sword principle, they were all exquisite and powerful too. However, in Jian Wushuang's view, they weren't as well crafted as mixed element spirits. I completely mastered the 4 moves in sword principle Xian Luo after comprehending for 1,800 years. I could also perform them perfectly. However, the power of the 4 moves in the sword principle would continue to improve as my comprehension heightened. I have to figure out a way to improve my understanding of swordsmanship, Jian Wushuang thought to himself. Just then, there was a sudden vibration from a token in Jian Wushuang's Qian Kuan ring. Huh! Emperor Bai sent me a message? Jian Wushuang's eyes dilated in shock. The vibrating token belonged to Emperor Bai. Jian Wushuang immediately started reading. Supreme Meeting of Sanctuary Alliance. Held in Thunderbolt Island? Jian Wushuang was stunned. Sanctuary Alliance was the highest alliance formed by human cultivators in order to deal with potential danger in eternal chaotic world. Previously, although Jian Wushuang had a conflict with Sanctuary Alliance because of Green Fire World, he was still a member of Sanctuary Alliance. Sanctuary Alliance was going to have a supreme meeting and he naturally qualified to participate as he was also one with fighting power of a great emperor. In Thunderbolt Island, there was an ancient, tall pavilion towering over the peak of Sanctuary Alliance. It was named Presbytery Pavilion. Presbytery Pavilion represents the highest authority of Sanctuary Alliance. Over the years, the higher-ups and experts from Sanctuary Alliance would gather at Presbytery Pavilion only when there was a major incident in eternal chaotic world. Whatever command was given via Presbytery Pavilion would be the highest command from Sanctuary Alliance. Even the command of the Supreme One in Sanctuary Alliance, Emperor Bai, wouldn't be higher than the command from Presbytery Pavilion. There was a huge round table in the middle of the void in Presbytery Pavilion. There were lofty thrones surrounding the round table. Every single throne was huge and there were many people who were seated on the thrones. For instance, Abysmal Saint Master, Ancestor Tian Chen, Great Emperor Zishu, Great Emperor Colored Glaze and many others had arrived. Vroom. On one of the thrones, a figure slowly substantiated. It was Jian Wushuang. Green Fire World and the surrounding ancient battlefield were extremely important to Sanctuary Alliance. Hence, Sanctuary Alliance had already paid a great price to build a space-time wormhole outside the ancient battlefield, which was Snow Kingdom. It could connect to the 10 cultivation sanctuaries and Thunderbolt Island. Hence, Jen Wushuang didn't need to spend much time to rush to Thunderbolt Island from Greenfire World. The moment Jen Wushuang appeared, there were many great emperors who looked over. Sword Emperor. Sword Emperor. Great emperors who didn't have beef with Jen Wushuang, like Great Emperor Purple Moon and Great Emperor East Royal, greeted Jen Wushuang simultaneously. Jen Wushuang responded with a smile. Sword Emperor only came alone. How about your sword servant and Lord Sound Spirit? There was a gentle voice. It was Great Emperor Zishu who asked. Great Emperor Zishu flashed a gentle smile and his eyes revealed kindness as well. Back then, although Great Emperor Zishu had once collaborated with Abysmal Saint Master and Great Emperor Colored Glaze to corner him, Great Emperor Zishu and Jen Wushuang shared no resentment, nor did they have conflict. Hence, neither party held grudges. My sword servant is in Greenfire World. As for Lord Sound Spirit, she isn't one from Sanctuary Alliance, Jen Wushuang replied with a smile. I see. Great Emperor Zishu was surprised, but he didn't ask further. As for Abysmal Saint Master and Great Emperor Colored Glaze wasn't happy, but Jen Wushuang didn't bother with them either. Besides that, among the great emperors there was another person who was unhappy with Jen Wushuang. The person was, of course, Yang Zun. 1,800 years ago, Jen Wushuang had challenged him and trampled on him mercilessly before many experts, which he was embarrassed about. Although he had investigated and found out it was because of Emperor God Han Yi, who had offered a sword Steely in exchange for Jen Wushuang to do that, it was a fact that Jen Wushuang had trampled on him. Almost all 13 great emperors of Sanctuary Alliance are here. Jen Wushuang looked around. Although there weren't only 13 great emperors on Heaven and Earth Supreme ranking list, the other few didn't join Sanctuary Alliance. For instance, Master Wu wasn't in Sanctuary Alliance. Hence, he naturally wouldn't participate in the meeting. Then, if Jen Wushuang didn't include himself, there were 10 of them who were already seated around the round table. Among the 10 great emperors, there were some who came in person and some who attended with incarnation. Vroom. 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 Then, 3 figures substantiated at the same time. The last 3 great emperors arrived. The last 3 great emperors were Emperor Bai, Red Dragon King and Ancestor Tian Chen. In Sanctuary Alliance, the 13 great emperors, including Jen Wushuang, all 14 great emperor experts were there. The supreme meeting started then. Everyone. It was a low, deep voice that belonged to Red Dragon King. Red Dragon King, in the second place on Heaven and Earth Supreme ranking list, second to Emperor Bai, he had once received the bloodline of an ancient dragon tribe in an ancient battlefield. Hence, he looked just like an ordinary human. The only obvious difference was the pair of red dragon horns on his forehead. Sanctuary Alliance held this supreme meeting for only one matter. Everyone, please watch. Red Dragon went straight to the point. He didn't even bother greeting the great emperors and took out a token straight away. The token was a mirror token. There was a huge image that appeared before all the great emperors then. All great emperors, including Jen Wushuang, were staring at the image. It was the black steel ball of the size of a holy kingdom plunging in the boundless void and rolling over everything. Chapter 2004 Dark Millstone. All great emperors were watching closely. They saw the huge black steel ball roll over everything like breaking pieces of deadwood. It even crushed the holy kingdom into pieces. The great emperor's gazes became terrified. It was really an astonishing sight. One should know how spacious a holy kingdom was and how many the cultivators were there. Even those great emperors, although they had absolute power and they could definitely destroy a holy kingdom, their destruction was limited to taking out the higher-ups only. As for killing all cultivators in the territories of the holy kingdom, although they would be able to do it, it would require a long time. After all, even if a great emperor were to destroy the world one by one, a holy kingdom was made up of thousands of worlds. It would take long enough to be entirely wiped out. The biggest possibility was to send the experts under their control and they would be able to make a holy kingdom disappear in a very short time. But then, the black steel ball was much fiercer. It didn't have any scruples, but a holy kingdom had vanished straight away after it had rolled over. Red Dragon, what is going on? Where did this thing come from? Abysmal Saint Master creased his eyebrows and looked at him. The other great emperors looked solemn too. They could tell how terrifying and powerful the black steel ball was. Red Dragon King took a deep breath and answered seriously, "What the thing is, where the thing is from, remains unknown for now. Emperor Bai, Tian Chen, and I named this thing earlier. We called it a dark millstone." Dark millstone? The great emperors nodded simultaneously. The black steel ball crushed everything along the way. It was really like a huge millstone. On top of that, its body was all black. Hence, it was best suited to the name Dark Millstone. According to the information that Sanctuary Alliance gathered, the Dark Millstone first appeared at the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire, and it had descended from the sky above. From the crack in the void above the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire, it had expanded and then destroyed the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire. Then, the Dark Millstone had started moving towards other holy kingdoms. Until now, besides the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire that the Dark Millstone first landed on, it passed 2 other holy kingdoms, and both holy kingdoms shared the same outcome as the Holy Kingdom of Celestial Fire. They were crushed to pieces, and countless cultivators didn't even stand a chance of escape. Then, the Dark Millstone was still moving around. Red Dragon King sounded solemn. The great emperors were astonished at the news. There were 3 holy kingdoms that had vanished into thin air in such a short period of time. The Dark Millstone was so terrifying. Not only that, an old voice was heard from Ancestor Tian Chen. Then, Ancestor Tian Chen also looked unprecedentedly solemn. At the very moment I received the news, I immediately sent an Emperor God from Sanctuary Alliance who was nearby to check on the Dark Millstone. The Emperor God just sent me an update that the Dark Millstone is constantly growing in size and power as it moves around. What? The great emperors' faces grew grave. The Dark Millstone was already so terrifying, but it was still constantly growing in size and power. The Dark Millstone had to be destroyed this instant. A great emperor said. Yes, we have to destroy it now. Worse comes to worst, we have to stop it. It crushed 3 holy kingdoms in such a short period of time. Although there are many holy kingdoms in eternal chaotic world, we still couldn't afford to be tormented like that. If the Dark Millstone couldn't be destroyed, the entire eternal chaotic world would be doomed. The other great emperors commented. They could see how threatening the Dark Millstone was. It was a great threat. If it wasn't destroyed anytime soon, it would absolutely cause great danger. In the end, the Dark Millstone might even wipe out the entire eternal chaotic world. Ancestor Tian Chen, did any of our great emperor from Sanctuary Alliance try to destroy the Dark Millstone? Jian Wushuang asked. He looked extremely solemn. Ancestor Tian Chen looked at Jian Wushuang and nodded faintly. When Sanctuary Alliance received the news, there was a great emperor who tried, and the great emperor is Emperor Bai himself. Emperor Bai? The great emperors around the round table looked at Emperor Bai, who hadn't spoken since the very beginning. Emperor Bai was the strongest one in Sanctuary Alliance. He took action personally. What happened? Jian Wushuang asked closely. He failed. Ancestor Tian Chen let out a sigh. How is this possible? The great emperors were taken by surprise. Emperor Bai took action personally, but he couldn't break the Dark Millstone. Then, Emperor Bai spoke. The Dark Millstone isn't simple. Not only did it contain terrifying power that could destroy everything, there was also a great formation on its surface. The Great Formation is very magical, very powerful. Its defense power was unbelievable. The defense power of the Great Formation continuously improved as the Dark Millstone moved. I think the Great Formation on the surface of the Dark Millstone and its setup is not any weaker than the one around the ancient battlefield that merged together with Spacetime Storm. Everyone was shocked once again. Jian Wushuang was shocked too. The Great Formation around the ancient battlefield was created by his master, Xian Yi. The Great Formation could be described as earth-shattering. It was an absolutely unbelievable skill. However, the Great Formation on the surface of the Dark Millstone could compare favorably with the formation that merged with Spacetime Storm. Although it was merely Emperor Bai's personal opinion and there might be a discrepancy, it was enough to show how powerful the Great Formation around the Dark Millstone was. There is such a powerful Great Formation set up around the Dark Millstone? Couldn't it be that the Dark Millstone is controlled by someone? Great Emperor Colored Glaze exclaimed in surprise. Everyone went quiet when they heard her comment. Everyone had already thought of the possibility. The Great Formation was definitely set up by someone. As there was a Great Formation around the Dark Millstone, it meant that someone was controlling the Dark Millstone and that person was most likely in the Dark Millstone. In Eternal Chaotic World, only the two dark forces, Holocaust Sect and Akron Palace, have the ability to produce the Dark Millstone and do such a thing, Emperor Bai said in a deep voice. For the past years, the two dark forces had been preparing to attack. I predicted that they would do something major in these few years and it happened as expected. Now that they have made the Dark Millstone, if Sanctuary Alliance doesn't figure out a way to destroy it or stop it, the entire Eternal Chaotic World will be destroyed. This crisis is a great danger and Eternal Chaotic World's existence is at stake. Chapter 2005 Expert Troop. Danger. A danger where Eternal Chaotic World's existence was at stake. The Great Emperor's on the spot and were extremely sure of that. Emperor Bai, a purple-haired woman, stood up. The purple-haired woman was Great Emperor Ji Luo in the 11th place on Heaven and Earth Supreme ranking list. She was also a master of a sanctuary. As the Great Formation outside the Dark Millstone is so powerful and even Emperor Bai can't have any effect on it, there is only one way to resolve the Great Formation and to destroy the Dark Millstone completely. We have to gather all Almighties in Eternal Chaotic World and Sanctuary Alliance. It'd be best if we could have a complete war formation or unique formation to break formation with formation. We could stand a chance to fight against the Dark Millstone, Great Emperor Ji Luo suggested. Millimeter, I was thinking the same, Emperor Bai nodded faintly. But it isn't easy to gather all forces in the entire Eternal Chaotic World at such short notice. On top of that, we have to form a war formation. On the other hand, the Dark Millstone is getting stronger too quickly and its travel speed is not slow either. Looking at its travel track, it is aiming at where the 10 sanctuaries are. At most, it would take a few thousand years for the Dark Millstone to appear in the 10 sanctuaries. But most importantly, we didn't even have time for a few thousand years because the size of the Dark Millstone would be at least a few dozen times bigger after a few thousand years. By then, we won't be able to have any effect on it even if we gather all Almighties in Eternal Chaotic World. 1,000 years. 1,000 years at most. Within 1,000 years, if we don't destroy the Dark Millstone or stop it, Eternal Chaotic World will definitely be exterminated. Everyone was shocked. 1,000 years. To great emperors, 1,000 years passed like a blink of an eye. However, they had to figure out a way to destroy the Dark Millstone within 1,000 years. 1,000 years, 1,000 years' time is too short. I'm afraid Sanctuary Alliance won't be able to prepare much within such a short period of time, Great Emperor Ji Luo said. That's right. Hence, Red Dragon King, Tian Chen and I discussed it and we plan to send out an expert troop to barge into the Dark Millstone. Then, Sanctuary Alliance will figure out a way to collaborate from within with forces from without. Then, Sanctuary Alliance won't need to prepare much but is only required to prepare some experts to form a great formation. That should be sufficient to influence the Dark Millstone, Emperor Bai said. Expert troop. The great emperors exchanged a look and nodded. It was naturally difficult to break a powerful formation with an external attack. However, if it was carried out from within, it would be much easier. Emperor Bai, didn't you say the Great Formation was extremely tough? It is hard to affect it even when you attacked it personally. Under such circumstances, it wouldn't be easy for us to break an opening on the Great Formation and send our experts in, right? Great Emperor Ji Luo creased her eyebrows and asked. It wouldn't happen if we forcefully barged in by force, but Sanctuary Alliance's foundation was solid after being established for so many years. If we were to play some tricks, we would still be able to break an opening to get in. However, the opening wouldn't last for long. It would only be a split second and we could only send 4 people at most. Hence, there will only be 4 people in the expert troop. As for the 4 people, Red Dragon, Tian Chen, and I already discussed it, Emperor Bai said. Then, the great emperors looked at Emperor Bai. They knew that there might be a large number of experts from Holocaust Sect and Akron Palace in the Dark Millstone. It might even be their base camp or lair. It would be extremely dangerous to barge inside, even if one were a great emperor. Hence, these 4 members of expert troop definitely couldn't be reckless. Abysmal Saint Master, Emperor Bai looked at Abysmal Saint Master by his side. Mr. Emperor Bai, although Abysmal Saint Master was arrogant and ambitious, and had been dying to stand on par with Emperor Bai or even above him, he would maintain an appropriate reverence when he was in front of Emperor Bai as he wasn't powerful enough yet. Among the great emperors in Sanctuary Alliance, you and Red Dragon are the strongest besides myself. But Red Dragon has got other matters to attend to and couldn't take up this task. So, you will be the leader of the 4-member expert troop to barge into the Dark Millstone. Will you? Emperor Bai said. Yes, Abysmal Saint Master nodded in agreement without hesitation. Although he was arrogant and jealous, he understood right and wrong. The crisis concerned the life and death of eternal chaotic world. As one of the higher-ups in Sanctuary Alliance, Abysmal Saint Master was naturally obligated. Ji Luo, Emperor Bai then looked at Great Emperor Ji Luo. Although you're not the strongest of the great emperors, your manipulation power of spacetime power is the best amongst all great emperors. Especially when you have the few secret skills of spacetime, you would be extremely important at crucial times. Among the 4 members, all you need to do is to assist the other 3, including yourself, to flee. Yes, Great Emperor Ji Luo nodded heavily. Emperor Zhu Qiao. Emperor Bai spoke again. Mr. Emperor Bai, an elder in a grey robe, stood up. He was scrawny and he had a crescent moon mark in between his eyebrows. The aura that he gave out was unique too. Emperor Zhu Qiao was in 9th place on Heaven and Earth Supreme ranking list. In terms of power, he was stronger than Great Emperor Ji Luo by 1 notch, but he wasn't that much stronger either. No one knows what is inside the Dark Millstone, especially the spacetime within. If the 4-member expert troop from Sanctuary Alliance enters the Dark Millstone and can't connect to the outside world using a communication token, we will need your doppelganger, Emperor Bai explained. Yes, Emperor Zhu Qiao didn't refuse. When Emperor Bai said that he was going to send a 4-member expert troop, he already foresaw himself being one of the members. Because he was the only one who had a doppelganger. It was very useful to send messages between the Dark Millstone and Sanctuary Alliance. The last person. Emperor Bai paused and looked at all the surrounding great emperors. The great emperors looked solemn. In the end, Emperor Bai's gaze stopped on a young man with a sword on his back. Jian Wushuang, Emperor Bai said. Me. Jian Wushuang was stunned. He wasn't nervous, nor was he afraid to go into the Dark Millstone. But he was shocked. Not only him, all the surrounding great emperors were shocked too. One should know that the 3 great emperors that Emperor Bai mentioned, Abysmal Saint Master was strongest in power. Hence, it would require his fighting power to deal with some danger when they entered the Dark Millstone. Emperor God Ji Luo was an expert in spacetime. She could help the members of expert troop to flee at a critical moment. Emperor Zhu Qiao had a doppelganger. In other words, he had a soul that shared 2 bodies. No matter what happened to his original body, his doppelganger would immediately know. In short, the 3 of them were extremely useful to the expert troop. However, what could Jian Wushuang bring to the table? You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,